Welcome to Health Oddity, the show that strips away the jargon and hype surrounding all things health and fitness to help you live a long, strong and energetic life. Lining up at the bar this week, here's Peter Lant, Paul Bassett and James St. Pierre.
Hello and welcome to the Health Oddity podcast, episode 83. We are continuing our run of 2022 with fantastic guests, and we have another guest today who I think you'll be expecting, because I think we've mentioned her for the last couple of episodes maybe, but I will introduce her in a minute. First of all, I will introduce our usual hosts. Mr. Peter Lant, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you very much. I'm working on my t-shirt tan, seeing as the weather's so nice. Okay. Every year, I try and not get a t-shirt tan, right? And it was really sunny on Saturday, wasn't it? And I went to meet Ben Morris, who we had on the podcast a few weeks ago. I went to meet him in Bristol down by the harbour, and we're standing outside, and then bang, I've got a t-shirt tan straight away. There you go. So that's another year that I didn't manage it. It's only March.
Well, you do a lot of your training with your top off now, don't you? You could go out and get some vitamin D and level out.
I only do that not because I think I look good or anything. It's just because I get sweaty, and then the way I look at it is I have to wash another t-shirt, where I could just do it without a t-shirt on, and then I don't have to worry about that. And I'm not scared. I'm not scaring anyone because I'm not in public, even though I do post it on Instagram. But anyway, there you go.
Anyway, there you go. Another. We always hand over to Paul after a little funny aside, don't we? How are you doing, Paul?
Not bad. I got visions that he trains with his top off, but walks around in public with his trousers off.
Yeah. How do you know I'm wearing trousers?
I know.
On any of these podcasts?
Well, occasionally you do get up to grab a book from a bookcase.
Do I? Oh yeah.
And,
there. Yeah.
And none of us get shocked or anything.
No,
so.
That's true.
Yeah.
But that's when it's cold.
Okay. Right. Anyway, I'm fine.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, I'm all right.
Good. And
I'm trained, fully clothed.
And you've got a cup of coffee. Oh, we've lost Kelly.
She's had enough already.
I thought she went.
We were only talking about. I mean,
it's the talk of.
You reckon she's just got this is a bit weird? This I'm off.
This is weird. What am I signing up for?
It's the talk of Peter with his trousers off. We'll give her a minute and see if she comes back on, because she was sat there and I did sort of think it looks like she's either looking very intently at us and looking a bit.
Yeah, I thought like
maybe
she was
the screen pause. Yeah, or maybe the screen pause. Maybe the screen pause. We'll see if Kelly comes back in.
We'll better have to say something interesting in the meantime then.
Well, no, I've got me editing to do again, haven't I?
I think we should keep this in.
Yes.
You never know. There might be a nugget of information that just pops out of one of our mouths.
There might be. Here, Kelly comes back on again. We will be with Kelly in a second. And I've just said Kelly about 5 times, so you know that Kelly is the guest for today. She's just logging back on. There you go. No.
We lost power.
You're back with us, Kelly. Don't worry.
We thought we'd just annoyed you already.
Oh, no, not at all. But I don't know. Like, I live in a condo and everything went dark. We lost power and now it's back. So hopefully it's, like I said, it's shitty weather out. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Can't be bad, like, because Paul's got young kids. In 1 week, his son just switched the internet off. Just went like click, and he just disappeared.
And he also interrupted the podcast asking for milk at one point as well.
That was true. Yeah.
Well, the guest we have today, I've just mentioned her name about 5 times while she was off air, is Kelly Manzone, who is joining us all the way from, I believe, Connecticut in the USA. Kelly is someone who I think probably all 3 of us have followed for a long time on social media, on Instagram. We've been aware of for a long time. We had Tina Morin on 2 weeks ago, who is good friends with Kelly as well. And I think Tina mentioned Kelly on the podcast. So Kelly is a personal trainer, an educator. She runs workshops. She's really different. I mean, hopefully on the back of this, if you don't follow Kelly already, then you will do, because you'll see on all her Instagram and her social media a real she's really into kind of physical culture and moving differently and using, kettlebells, Indian clubs, maces. I think they're called Sheena boards or Shena boards or push-up boards, shields, all different kinds of things, and really, really incredible kind of stuff. So it's the first time I've actually spoke to Kelly in person, but we are delighted to be joined today by Kelly Manzone. How are you doing, Kelly?
I am good. Thank you very much for having me on. Hopefully the electricity stays on. If I lose you, I apologize. But I'm excited to be here because I love just hanging out and chatting all things movement, physical culture, open book over here. So I'm excited to have this dialogue.
Excellent. So do you want to, Kelly, just for our listeners and for us, just to kind of tell us a little bit about kind of yourself, your own background within training, physical culture, how you came to, be the person you are today, doing what you're doing today. And just a little bit about your journey that brought you to us today, if that's okay.
Absolutely. So I've been a lifelong mover. I started off as a child in gymnastics, dance, which I absolutely loved, and then explored some sports. I was a pitcher in softball. I did track team. I'm so slow, I can't run, but I gave it a shot. And then I did shot put for a bit. That was fun. And I was also on the swim team, butterfly, and was my favorite, along with breaststroke. Then in college is when I put my way through school. So I was 17 when I became 100% independently on my own financially. So I had to pay for school myself, and I got kind of out of shape. And then I was 19 or I think I was 19 or 20. And I woke up one day and I went back into exploring movement in training. And then I was in my early 20s when I was in Danbury, Connecticut, working out at the local gym, like it was the war memorial. So it was like the town facility. It was affordable for me. And I was one of the only girls, or women, I guess you could say, in the weight room. And I would often get approached. People thought I worked there. And I'm like, no, I don't work here. I'm just working out. And then I moved to Orlando and the same thing happened. I was working out at a gym and one of the only women in the weight room. And I got approached a couple of times thinking that I worked there. And then I was approached by a basketball coach. And we just had this dialogue. And he thought that, I could help out his team. And I was like, oh, I'm just, that's not my career. And then I found my career. So basically that's how I was like, I'm going to turn my passion for movement into a career. That's how I got started. And now I'm celebrating my 20th year this year in the industry. And I have long been fascinated by movement and history and physical culture. And it was really in 2006 when I live in Westport, by the way, or I don't live in Westport. I work in Westport. I live in Fairfield or Southport. And I got started in mainstream fitness. And I never felt like I quite fit in. I was always like, there's more to movement than having people line up on a series of machines, which there's nothing wrong, to each their own. But I was like, why are we taking people that sit all day and having them sit? So I often explored other training practices and modalities that I had interest in. And when I first touched a kettlebell, I think it was in 2005 or 2006, I was like, the sky parted. And I'm like, because it was that communication, that tactility with the handle and the palm, and that exploration through various planes of motion, and just the central nervous system kind of coming alive. And the kettlebell was sort of my gateway into exploring other historical modalities, like the various clubs and maces and everything behind me, which has continued to evolve over the years, hence these massive jori, which I'm trying to swing. And I always liked introducing some of these elements. So, what I share on my Instagram page is a lot of my own personal practice. And even though I still work daily with clients in mainstream fitness, I have a wide range of modalities and certifications and training philosophies that I incorporate with my clientele. And then another portion of my clientele that's online or that attends workshops is fellow fitness professionals, where they might, be contacting me for a specific skill-based modality. So I just like blending. I love exploring the gray areas in movement because I think there's a lot of beauty in gray and being open-minded. And, we only have one life. So, depending on what you believe, but, I feel like I want to learn and explore these practices and enjoy the process along the way, and hopefully inspire others to do so too.
So how do you fit it all in? Because I've done something similar, started with a kettlebell and then, tried working with maces and Indian clubs and then Meels. And it's nice to be able to move and what have you. And especially when the sun comes out. So in the summer, I'll go down the park early where I train my guys and take some meals with me and just play with them for half an hour or whatever. So it fits into my day quite nicely. But how do you fit all of it in?
That's great.
Because you've got so much equipment there. And it feels like you're just there all day, every day, just chucking it around. And
this is my living room.
Yeah. Well, same with me, yeah.
And so I'll turn the camera around. So that's our kitchen. And then as you see, there's the kettlebells and other stuff. My husband is very supportive in our condo.
That's brilliant, right? Because obviously we only ever see that one little corner on Instagram. And I'm like, I wonder what the rest of it looks like.
A Tower Bridge.
It's our small condo. So I thankfully my work at the gym, I train people here, and then I work at a gym that literally I could pour my cup of coffee, go 2 lights, and I'm boop at the gym. And then my in-home clients are all within like a 10 to 15 minute drive.
When you panned the camera around, did you have Tower Bridge there and like the Coliseum or something?
Yes. And then the Harry Potter thing, that would be my husband and son. And I have knocked shit down over here with my clubs before.
Okay.
So it's like making small spaces work. Yes.
What are they? Is it Lego or is it like models or?
It's Legos.
Oh, okay. It's Lego. Okay. Yeah. Fantastic.
Life's work destroyed by a club.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's happened.
Well, that's like that wall over there. You mentioned something, you can get like wall erasers, can't you, to rub marks out? And I mentioned that to Sean. She was like, no, it's covered in stuff. So we're going
what were we talking about there, Pete? You were talking
about how I fit it in. So
yes.
This is a really good question. And I've never been asked that on a podcast, which that's a good question. So how I fit it in is these modalities, like whether we'll take circular training, for example, right? So even though the dimensions and styles of swinging or weight of the clubs is different, there's a common thread, right? Like midline crossing, or where the ring finger is located, the cast, so there's a lot of like similarities, even though they're kind of different breeds within the circular training element. So I kind of sprinkle in throughout the day a little bit of practice because I come and go, especially since the pandemic. Like some of my work is online and some is in person. And I just have a tendency to have some days that are more programmed and structured. Like now I'm prepping for Kettlebell Sport competition in October. And then I have like intuitive movement and in times when I'm really trying to focus on skill. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a long period of time, but I tend to like put on like, maybe it's the same Pink Floyd song or something like or a Tool song. I will play that same song for a half hour or an hour. Like if I'm in the zone and I'm really trying to hone in on like a skill that day. For example, last week when I was swinging the Jory and practicing with the mace on the other shoulder, I had a cancellation. So I was like, okay, it's been a while since I've practiced these. And I literally just set myself up in my living room for an hour and I go down, I get this hyper focus because I have ADHD and I just hyper focus and I just dial in. And so I kind of structure days specific to if I'm looking for a more of a strength day and more challenging work, and others that are more skill-based. And on a skill-based day, maybe I have a rowing machine behind the couch. We have everything here.
You have a sofa.
Yeah, behind the sofa. So I've logged, over 2,150,000 meters during COVID on our rowing machine.
Yeah.
And I just sprinkle it out throughout the day. Then I have a son who's now in middle school. What? So I've got to fit in my stuff around his activities. And so I just kind of take it day by day, even though sometimes I plan out the week, but as you know, as a parent, it's not always, or in this business, my clients come first. So I have to be adaptable.
You see, I love that, because the way of fitting it all in, because a lot of the stuff, they're massive jewelries behind you, but the clubs and the meals and stuff, you can do just as kind of movement practice. So I do that, like you said, say for listeners who are sitting down all day at home or at work or whatever, it's like we try and say get up every hour or so and just go for a walk, or go and do something, or do a little bit of hip mobility or shoulder mobility or whatever. And you can do that with these, can't you? Because you don't get tired from it if you do it with light clubs or whatever. So that's really good, the way you say you sprinkle it throughout the day, and then it's just kind of skill practice, and it's not really focused training.
I want to bring you back to that thing you were talking about, circles, because this is going to be something that people probably aren't familiar with. Most people think, well, I'm exercising. So most of our listeners aren't trainers. We do have a lot of trainers. So you've got a series of kind of weighted clubs, or kind of wooden and metal and probably maces and things like that, which are held in each hand, and you swing them around your head in variety of different kind of movements. A bit like semaphore or something like that. If someone's never if we're trying to explain something over the course of a podcast in audio. But what are you talking about when you mention circles?
Well, circular training itself, it creates a series of circles and spirals around the body. So you tap into casting out on the frontal plane, you tap into the sagittal plane. When you're swinging a mace, you get the transverse turn through the shoulders. And so when you talk about circular training, that's kind of like the umbrella of various modalities that you swing, the steel club, from the Meels, the polyvandal, the Jory, and in some ways, your kettlebell training also, you create a series of patterns, and the pendulum of the kettlebell swing, the pendulum of the backswing. So
sorry, I was about to say, is that a consequence of the tool that you're using, or is that a training approach that you're trying to instill in someone? So by that, I mean, is it just the fact by using those kind of weights or those kind of clubs that's what you naturally have to do in order to do that? Or is it for a reason that you wanted to develop a particular attribute?
Well, it depends so I'm not sure exactly specifically what you're asking, but it kind of depends. These tools have a history from Iran and India that were used originally to train their warriors for battle. From there, it went into the wrestling. You got the Zirconium sport in Iran and the Akaras in India, and that's instilled in their culture with a rich history. So club training originally, when you're swinging Meels, one is sword, one is supposed to be the shield. As
right. Okay.
Your count. And now in modern times, or how I think of the progressions of it branching out into the West and beyond, or how it could fit into the elements of current training practices or traditional strength training, is a lot of our traditional strength training and movement patterns are very linear. Push, pull, press, hinge, squat, fantastic, right? But from the dawn of mankind, we've also been throwers. We've also been sword fighters. We've also, been working on the farm where you're not in such a linear pattern. So midline crossing of the body not only works both hemispheres of our brain, and works with tactility, which we discussed earlier, and coordination and the importance of dexterity and waking up our central nervous system. It also coordinates into like real life strength, which we need now to counterbalance a lot of what we currently live like in modern times. I personally found that once I started implementing these modalities, my grip became stronger, my overhead press lockout became better, and I just noticed more resilience in my body as I trained as a lifelong athlete, and also my ability to feel better connected by tying in the the natural X of the body or contralateral movement, because there's so many fun patterns that you could stick with the original tools and how they were used, and the exploration of how, even for Peter, who does club swinging, from the British adaptation, and then you have like more of a modern adaptation. And I feel like it's kind of all these ingredients for a really good meal, like, a life movement practice meal. So I find that circular training elements are kind of like the missing link in what we could benefit from in modern times. And I just got contacted by a semi-professional hockey team in Connecticut. And in April 5th, I'm going to go meet with one of the coaches about implementing Indian clubs for the hockey players. And I've got a few professional baseball players that follow me that, are there. I feel like club swinging or some modality of circular training has been missing in athletics for a really long time. And with the onslaught of media and the benefit of Peter sharing his practice, me sharing my practice, Paul Volkovinsky, who's been a real pioneer the past decade plus of sharing these modalities. Now people are realizing, oh, this is something that I could possibly benefit from on different levels. I hope that made sense. That was long.
Yeah, that answers the question perfectly. Yeah, no, it's interesting that you're looking to work with particular sports. I mean, I'm thinking of banning my clients from playing Sunday league football because they always come back completely wrecked. So I mean, a lot of the time, like you say, all of these movements are linear, whether it's press ups, bench press, pull ups, even a two-handed kettlebell swing. There's this kind of linear nature to it, but often life isn't like that, is it? And when you're playing sports, squash or anything like that, or you're just playing with your kids, you start going outside these positions. And for many people who've spent their life at a desk, that's basically the injury zone, isn't it? Even just playing with kids, you get people injured.
Well, you see it with people who just play recreational sport, like play tennis and squash and what have you, and they end up with, or golf even, they end up with like tendinitis in their elbows, sore shoulders from sitting hunched over at a desk and all this. And then you talk about the people who use the clubs, clubs came sort of out of India, and the Iranian guys chucking the big meals around, and it's like they rarely get shoulder injuries, right? Because their shoulders are bulletproof by the fact that they're taken through these ranges of motion with beginning off lightweights. And then you see some of the Iranian guys with the meals they're using, they're massive.
Really
it's
impressive.
just bonkers. But like Paul says, for the listeners, it's real life, isn't it? So you're playing with your kids, you're picking them up. You don't pick them up forwards and put them down forwards. You pick them up and they move to the side and move this way and that way. And I've had friends like in the garden, picking a stone up and move it from there to there, and they'll put their back out because they've never kind of pivoted while lifting stuff. So it really helps with that, doesn't it?
I believe so. When you mentioned the tennis players and golfers, I created before the pandemic Sturdy Athlete program, and I took a combination of stick mobility, body weight, original strength exercises, and basic Indian club patterns. And I created a small group class for local tennis players at two different locations, one at the racket place in New Canaan and one at a country club here in Fairfield, to help these women and to cycle out of PT. So they end up in physical therapy every 6 months, or they're dealing with these chronic injuries, and they're most of us are aware that like professional athletes train specifically for their sport. And then in recreation, people play without training for that recreation. So even though maybe on the weekends they're going to a cycling class, which is absolutely fantastic, kudos, you know, you're running, you're doing that, but you're not really doing anything sport specific. Yet, you know, you go from playing tennis to paddle in the winter, and then you have these chronic injuries, and then you also start creating imbalances. So I was hoping with that to have people kind of be a little bit more aware of how they need some accessory training, especially, you know, I'll be 43 this year, feel better than I did at 20, feel very resilient. And, you know, some of these people are not that much older than me or is around the same age, and they're constantly in PT.
Yeah.
So, you know, like it's also making it accessible and attainable. So what you see sometimes of what I'm doing on Instagram is my personal practice of like a long period of time of like exploring that skill-based modality. But people in general could benefit from maybe like 5 simple patterns that they could learn, that they, or you have like 2 different logs, like workout A, 5 club patterns, workout B, 5 club basic patterns, and you just cycle through those. And, you know, I feel like it's it helps to fill in the gaps, and it helps to kind of create a little bit more resiliency in the tendons, joints, ligaments, muscles.
Do you, Kelly, still also do some more conventional kind of strength training as well as the circular training? I know you mentioned Kettlebell Sport, and I know that's not, it may sound conventional because we talk about it, you know, we talk about it a lot on this podcast, but for the majority of the population, Kettlebell Sport is not conventional. It's a kind of a small niche kind of sport, I suppose. So do you also do some kind of almost like compound lifts and things like that, or do you get you do? Yeah.
Yep. So
Yeah.
like, you know, when I'm at the gym, I go through like my barbell lifts. I have a cable machine. I'm not like a big machine person. The only machine I really use with my clients is like a cable machine. And I really try to get in some barbell work or trap bar for deadlift. So I deadlift, I do high, you know, jerks, high pulls, all that. But the vast majority of my workouts are within my home space. And then when I'm at the gym training clients, I'll fill in the gap. And I do, you know, dumbbells and more conventional work. But my main focus is kind of like the exploration of what I've got going on at home, because I feel like for me personally, it really enriches me from the inside out, and I feel like I could be more accessible to my clientele, and more versatile to help fill in the gaps or provide some additional information for them.
And I like how you kind of separate. I don't know if you actually separate, but in how you kind of in your the way you described it, kind of had skill practice, you know, and kind of this kind of different sort of, which is like you say, skill practice that you can pick up and you can do for 10 or 15 minutes, and you're practicing patterns and movements. And then you've got maybe more traditional, you know, strength training that you do, and then you've got your rowing machine as well that you do your kind of, you know, cardiovascular training on as well. Where you mentioned, I think Tina is also doing Kettlebell Sport in October, isn't she?
Yeah. So she signed up, and I was like, all right, I want to be there to support her. And I was like, well, I haven't been on the platform since 2018. I'm gonna get on the platform again.
So you have a history, and I've seen photos of you from the past anyway. So but you've got a history of competing in Kettlebell Sport, and now you've had a little break, obviously, but now you're going to come back to it again, yeah?
Yeah, my friend Yuri started American Kettlebell Alliance. So when he started AKA, he came here. My son was like a baby. Literally, I was like breastfeeding him, and Yuri comes over. I'm going to start my own kettlebell sport competition company. Can you help me translate Russian to English? And I'm like, sure, you know. And then he brought it to fruition, and he's like, you know, encouraging me to get on the platform back in 2017, I think it was. And so I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And I kind of jumped in, and I did too many competitions in a short period of time. And then in 2018, as my education side of my business started to grow, and I was being approached to start workshops and everything like that, I dialed back on the training for sport because I wanted to focus on the education piece of my business, and I couldn't do it all. And now I feel like I'm in a really good spot mentally to take on the training, and I'm going to, be a little bit smarter about approaching the training, because I do struggle with high volume overhead. I have a lot of hypermobility in my joints. And so being very linear is not comfortable for my body. And I personally need to midline cross and move in different planes of motion and do those traditional strength lifts like deadlifts or compound movements to kind of keep me grounded. So I feel like in a really good place to get on the platform. And I really respect people that do it full time. Like there's so many amazing lifters out there. I just personally do it for my own personal challenge. And coming out of the pandemic, I needed to kind of feel like goal oriented towards something to reground myself. And so that's why I'm getting back on the platform. And I like to have fun with it and enjoy it, the process of training for it.
And what will you be competing in? Will you be doing long cycle? Will you be doing like a biathlon or?
I'm just going to do long cycle. When my first few competitions, I went in double 12s. And then the last two I did single 16, and I'm going to start with single bell 16. I feel like because I'm really trying to hone in on and crisp up a lot of my meal training, and trying to be, I think, the only woman in the world swinging these large jewelry. I just have to be very smart. I use my body for a living, and I row, I hike, I do all these things, and I just want to be able to stay well during training. And maybe once I kind of go through the process again, I'll go back to double bell, because I personally like double bell better than single bell, but I just want to be smart about my approach.
Because we had Eric Doyle on from Unconventional.
Awesome.
What's that? Yeah. And is the competition, because he was talking about kind of like an American kind of kettlebell competition where you can change hands as often as you want, and you can put the bell down, and it's kind of far more inclusive way of training. Is the one that you go into, is it that, or is it more like you can only change hands once, or what's the kind of format? One hand switch?
Yep, I'm going to do single bell long cycle, one switch, 10 minutes.
Okay, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, and I have a few friends training for the biathlon, and I just admire them. That high volume, I just end up, my body gets mad. So I have to find that sweet spot for where I'm at, because I don't want to take away from the other things that I'm focusing on too.
Yeah.
As soon as you focus on volume and you want to be specific, you do have other things you need to take into consideration, because a lot of people just jump into, I'm going to train for this, or I'm going to train for that. And that's fine. And that's probably very possible and very doable. And it's probably very admirable as well, because it does focus the mind, and many people really respond to having that goal. But you kind of got to level up everything else alongside that, haven't you? You can't just add loads of volume and not have the right recovery in there. Yes. And wonder why your body just falls apart. In particular, at a certain age, there's a particular thing. I mean, I'm sure it's the same in States, where particularly men just get to the age of 42 and decide to go for an Ironman, and and then wonder why they are absolutely dead on their feet for the whole of their week, and drag themselves through training, because they don't have a recovery strategy. They don't know when to say stop, because you might actually end up having a higher performance level by doing less, from the sound of it, because you are just knowing when to say no, because it's quite easy just to get carried away in the moment, isn't it?
I think so. And then also, it depends on where you're at, professionally too. So if your mind space is overwhelmed by your day-to-day life outside of training, that impacts your quality of training, your recovery, your focus. And I'm at a really good spot right now where I could refocus coming out of the pandemic on how to rebuild my workshops again, as Peter and I talked about earlier before we went live, about navigating coming back out. Are people looking for in-person, or are they looking for virtual? And if I'm creating workshops, creating online content, plus training people in person, plus the emails, the phone calls, the DMs, if I'm constantly slamming my body with high volume right now, on top of like motherhood, my husband, my household, the dog, then I'm not going to really be giving my best output. And I think that's what's awesome too about getting older within the industry in a great way is like at 43 in October, I feel like amazing right now. I want to continue feeling amazing. So I'm going to be a little bit more realistic about how my body personally responds to things. And I think if we all kind of had that internal dialogue, and it's okay to like say, all right, I might need to back off of this, or I need to tweak this, or maybe I'm not in the right mindset for this. I'm not like somebody that, like I have people that I really respect and admire, and they're friends of mine who are always following like a program to the T in times when their body would probably be better off saying, okay, I'm not in the right headspace for this, so that they could not get into some of the chronic exhaustion or chronic pain. And I think like that's the beauty of getting older within the industry or older in a sport. You could stay capable, but you have to be realistic and communicate with yourself.
That's brilliant because you've seen it all before, right? It's like it goes with life, doesn't it? You get to a certain age and then you're like, well, I was talking about this the other day because one of my guys was having a bit of a problem, not with sport or anything, just in life. And we're all in our 40s and 50s, so we were just all standing around and had a chat with him about it and all empathize because we've all been through something similar. Well, you mentioned hypermobility a minute ago, so there will be people listening to this who possibly have hypermobility, right? And in my experience,
loads of my clients.
Yeah. And in my experience with that, people think, oh, well, that's great. I'm hypermobile, so I can get into positions. And we've spoke about this before. So we had David Keown on a while ago, and then we had a workshop with him. And then Dennis Vasilev works on this. And basically, like all the best lifters are really mobile, aren't they? They've got great mobilities for the overhead position and all of this sort of stuff. And David's worked a lot on that. Dennis has worked a lot on it. Now, you obviously don't have to work on that on the mobility side. However, the stability of the weights, that's what you're going to need to work on, right? And we've spoke about this before of mobility, stability, and motor control and how people get confused with all of that. So for Paul's clients, most of them, and for hypermobile people, how do you manage that? Because obviously you can get into positions really easily, but you can't like if they're under load or anything, you can't really control it, right? So
well, I have been working for years with like working my end range under load. As you can see, like some of the things that I've done on Instagram, my mobility is controlled under load. What happens in Kettlebell Sport specifically with the rack position being on the hips and with that volume of overhead, I found that I had a tendency as the repetitions were increasing, or as I would personally get fatigued, or if my brain was not sharp and in focus, I would end up like leaning too far back into my lumbar and then jerking my bells from my lower back versus my hips. And then in my lockout up overhead, instead of kind of being nicely placed here, I would my head would go far forward, and then all of a sudden I started having these issues. So I'm only 2 weeks into training for the competition in October, and I'm trying to I film myself from front and side view when I'm practicing. That's the same thing that I do with all these modalities, so I could visually see it, watch it back, notice those little nuances. And I'm trying to pace myself a lot better. So when I'm going into my sport lifts, like later today, I've got my sport training. I'm more cognizant in with the reps as I'm slowing down. I'm like, okay, where's my alignment? Like I know I have built up a foundation where if I'm resilient, where it's like somebody that hasn't worked on their foundation all of a sudden picked up a modality where their mobility is going to be tested on that end range or under load, they are more apt to possibly have an injury. Whereas like this is a thread I've been aware of since my gymnastics days, since butterfly. Butterfly, you have to be so mobile in the pool to do.
I've always with swimming, I've always thought, how do you get into, who does butterfly? And it turns out it's you. Like honestly, in school, how do you go? I'll do that one. Honestly,
yeah. And then like right now, if I tried it in the pool now, I think I would face plant. It helped me with mace training. It helped me with circular training because in order to be able to swing these modalities, you need to have a certain amount of mobility. That's a common theme that I've noticed is people get into club swinging or mace because they want to improve their mobility, but it's required as a prerequisite for being able to swing. So that's where you have people running into tendonitis, elbow issues, wrist issues, issues with their T-spine, because you need to have a certain amount of mobility in order to swing properly.
But, this is what we were talking about with David on the workshop as well, was the injury window, he was calling it, the difference between, so you've got passive, so for the listeners, you've got passive mobility where, say, I don't know, you stand on one leg and lift your knee right up to your chest and hold it there. You can hold it there, and then that's your passive mobility. But then when you let go, if it doesn't stay there and it drops and then you catch it a few inches lower, that's your active mobility, isn't it? So like you were saying, you can get into positions with your arms right behind your head and everything forward, your head right the way forwards and everything, but you can't control that, right? So if there's
more control now, like I'm stable in those positions. It's just that like if I fatigue, or if I'm not cognizant, I will like not be as stable. I remember like I had an MRI on my shoulder in my early 20s. I went through like a very crazy like calisthenics phase. I was 20 or 25 pounds lighter, I think. I could do 2-finger push-ups with my thumb and my middle finger and pull-ups and everything. And I was doing all this body weight stuff. And I was at that time, before I got into the industry, I was a server. I was a waitress. So I was constantly doing this with tables, wiping down, carrying my trays up overhead, but I lacked stability at that time. And that's when I found out about like, that there was nothing wrong with my joint. Everything was fine. I was just very hypermobile. And that was suggested that I really hone in on my strength, balance strength, I guess you could say. And that became like just a thread throughout the last 20 years. So I'm always kind of cognizant and aware of it, but I could work my end range under load and have stability. I do kettlebell arm bars. You do a lot of like farmer's carries, overhead holds, scapular retractions. A lot of the Shenna board work, I feel like really helps me too with not just that linear push-up. I dial in to, the Shenna pitch where you're getting different, it's almost like a transverse turn through the shoulders in a way. And I feel like all those elements have really helped me to create more balance and more resiliency, getting the teres major, teres minor to kind of support the joint a little bit more. So those are things that like, I think, will help me this time around as I'm more alert, 4 years on.
I think the difference is between what you're doing and say, I think there's generally two solutions that happen for hypermobility. One solution is the body's solution. The other one is one that you can create. The first one is that the body just creates stiffness there. So a lot of my hypermobile clients actually have very restrictive movement in certain areas because body obviously doesn't trust at all in any way that it can control it, and therefore just locks everything down, like the hips locked down on the knees, ankles are locked down, or like the joints either side of the weak, like if it's a knee problem or an elbow problem, it's the shoulders locked out, or like what you're doing is saying, I can actually create stability and stiffness that I actually own, and I understand the context in which I'm applying that, because through scapular retractions, for example, you're trying to increase strength through that full range. And you're trying to create stability, but it's stability that then you own rather than stability that's happening like almost like a cast, because the body will just create this kind of almost a blanket stability where it's just like locks it down. Whereas you can be very specific to the muscle and to the movement, can't you?
Yes. And I also feel like when I started to really implement the midline crossing of the body and being more cognizant of the connection with my feet and the connection, like I just became more aware of how, connected and grounded everything can be, tying in the X of the body, full body tension or integration. And I don't really think of things so much as always being isolated. I think of it as being like a full unit. And I think that helps people too, like with, if you're holding load up overhead, but you're not connected to the trunk of the body or your feet, you're just going to be unstable.
Kelly, can I ask? You mentioned, I think, the Shenna board just a minute ago, and I mean, I've obviously seen them being used and seen you use it a lot, but I'd imagine a lot of our listeners probably have no idea what it is, what it looks like, and what it's for. And just like we had Tina on a couple of weeks ago, and she mentioned sort of DVRT and sandbag training, and then I kind of asked her to kind of explain it a little bit more for the listeners, and for us as well. Can you just kind of explain a little bit, what the Shenna board is, where it's from, what it's for, what it looks like, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. And to the mention of sandbags, I do a lot of sandbag work too, just because that feedback to the body with instability and then having to create that stability. I feel like that's really helped me carry over also with being able to control and range and hypermobility. When it comes to the Shenna board, that is part of the ancient Persia training of within the Pahlvans and in the Zircone sport. So you have body weight exercises where they're standing, and you have body weight on the Shenna, and then the Meels are a part of that system. So they train what's called the goat. It's like the circular training room, and they also practice to music. The Shenna, from what I understand, was created for on sand, instead of, they would have like something to support in their training. Like Paul refers to it almost as like a sword board, because at one time they would use the sword in the sheath and practice. So I personally love the history, and I think it's also a very beautiful practice to watch and to practice. I like the leverage of the board, that grip, like as I have mentioned a few times, that tactility, that little bit of height off of the floor. I feel like I get more full body like integration and activation. Like I really, really like the half moon push-ups, where it's twisting push-up, and the split Shenna split push-up. That's where the legs are very wide. Sometimes they interlock their feet, and that kind of is a nice hip opener. And they do like high volume of push-ups within the Zircone sport practice. I like to draw that in to my own personal practice, because I do feel like I'm connected with my feet, connected with my hands, and everything in between. And I love, like I said, movement throughout all planes of motion. So there's quite a number of various push-ups that are implemented in the Zircone. And in India, they use bricks. So you have your dons, and their bricks, your position with your hands is different. So, on the Shenna board, you have that overhand grip, whether narrow or wide. And in India, you have your bricks, and you have that kind of inside grip.
So the Shenna board itself is like, it's like a raised wooden plinth, isn't it? That's kind of, it looks a bit like, for listeners.
Is it Shena? Is that how you spell it?
Pronounce Sheno, Sheno.
N-O, okay.
S-H, I call it Shenna. So Shenna, and then I put in parentheses Sheno. It's kind of like, how I don't know, with like verbiage is a little different. Like there's a couple of different spellings of Zircone, Z-O-O-R, and then Zircone, Z-U-R. So this is from my friend Hammurabi in California, and it has this one's beautiful. I forget the type of wood. This is actually was designed by a female artist in China, because Hammurabi lived in China for a decade before he moved back to California, and he had been teaching Clubbells and working on Shenna in China before he came back to California. But so this is one. I have 3 different boards, and they all have their own personality, much like any type of kettlebell and or Indian club or mace has their own personality. But it's just as I could come in. This one I like because it has a little bit of tapering here, so a little bit more of a narrow grip on the outside. I feel like I could get a little bit more leverage. But I really enjoy it. I go on to Shenna a few days a week.
So it's great because this, when we mentioned, I suppose we haven't really talked about it a lot on the podcast, not this podcast, but any podcast, the phrase, physical culture. I don't know. I think we had Steve Cotter on a few weeks back, and he mentioned physical culture as a.
That was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, because you're really bringing in, I suppose, elements of history and global culture and different traditions and things into your drawing from all these traditions for your training, aren't you? Which is a totally unconventional and different way of training, like you mentioned at the start, rather than rows and rows of machines in a gym, all training sort of in a linear way. Can I ask as well? I'm being very curious. The wooden shields, I've seen you use those as well. Behind you.
Those are
just explain a little bit about that for me, if that's okay.
Oh no, it's a part of the Zircone practice. Now, I don't practice sayings as much as I do the circular training or the Shenna, and it's I guess you could say the equivalent to their kettlebell or barbell, in the sense that but what's fantastic about it though too, when it was used for training, is that grip, and you're moving these boards throughout different planes of motion. So if you're doing a chest press, just that weight distribution, and now these are not technically that heavy, but because of the weight distribution and the grip in that change of kind of almost like rotating the knuckles in or under or over, it's like 3-dimensional. That's what I because it's like back in the day before the kettlebell came a lot later, but before our dumbbells or our barbells, having tools like that are, for me, like I said, more 3-dimensional. It really taps into that multi-planar movement. And also that connection, that having to control that movement pattern. So they use that as, their chest press. Rolling presses are amazing. And I personally am fascinated by it. I think it's so, I don't know, innate. I feel like these are innate to me. I like that. I like, the exploration, and I want to continue. I plan on swinging these or doing whatever I can till, look at Paul is 72.
Yeah.
I don't plan on slowing down anytime soon, and just watching his skill of how he swings his meal or the body turns with his gatas and stuff like that. I see this, I don't just approach it as exercise. I think of this as like a lifelong.
You've just mentioned something that I haven't mentioned on a podcast for a while, actually, but what does it look like in 20 years? What does it look like in 30 years? So you see someone like Paul.
Not me, by the way.
Not this Paul. Paul.
I'm 42. I'm not 70.
Yeah. Paul Volkovinsky, he's been doing this for like 30 years or something, hasn't he? No, he hasn't. No. He's been doing it like 10 or 15 years or something like that. And it looks really good what he does, and he's very skillful. So you think like, wow, that's amazing. I wish I could be like that. And it's like, yeah, well, he's 30 years older than you. So you will, if you carry on, you will be like that by the time you get to his age, won't you? And you will look like that. So it's that's a great way to look at stuff. I think what you've just
Well,
mentioned.
I always think of like what we do now in this decade sets us up for the decade to come.
Yep.
You know, oftentimes, and especially in our industry, people are always trying to turn back the clock, and nobody's clock is going back. So
No.
if I was to look at and feed my brain with just watching, and there's nothing wrong with this, 20-year-olds are inspiring, but you know, like if I was trying to look how I did at 20 or chase that, I'm neglecting that of what my body currently needs or of what is to come. I always look to people that have come before me for inspiration. I'm inspired by those that have come after me for sure. But I'm very inspired by those that have come before me. And Paul is, not only is he my mentor, but a dear friend. You know, I'm inspired by how he has continued to train throughout his cancer diagnosis, and how, you know, people could look at these tools and they seem so foreign and so like, oh, you know, injury prone. But then you know, you dial it back and you look at all the layers of the onion, and you see somebody like Paul who has been at this, you know, he picked it up in his late 50s, you know, and how his practice has evolved to creating body turns, to creating sagittal swings. And I just find that super inspiring. He's back at kettlebells again. You know, he's had a lot going on, and he continues to keep going. There's a woman around here in Connecticut who's 72, and she is like a local legend. She's a power lifter, and she's deadlifting 225 pounds for multiple reps, you know, and she got a bench press PR, and she's 72 years old. That inspires me. Her sister, younger sister, I think is 58 or 60, and she was in the CrossFit games. You know, like, so there's this mental piece of your history with movement, and there's also just a more innate thing. If you have to feel connected to it. It's like brushing your teeth. It's nurturing you. It's like a good night's sleep. Movement doesn't always have to be in that main frame of what is discussed all the time and fed to us in ads. It's more than that. And I think like that's not often discussed in our industry. It's exercise, reps, sets, this. But there's
which there is a place for.
Absolutely.
And progression and everything. But outside of that, so I think going back to what was said earlier, outside of that, there's just practice of form and you know, like you said, you skill practice. That's the word I was looking for. So there's the lifting stuff and getting stronger and sets and reps and all of that, because a progressive program. But then around that, there's the skill practice, which could be just walking as well, you know, just going out and just enjoying life, basically.
Skill of practice also removes the ego a little bit.
Exactly.
Because reps are great. I like reps, but there's certain things like powerlifting, you know, kettlebell sport we've been talking about, all those strength sports particularly, it's very easy to tangle your ego up in the whole thing.
Yep.
And it's very difficult to remove once you've done that, because we all have expectations about what we think we can do, what we used to do. And I suppose some of the things that you're using, because they're very, very kind of alien to most people's kind of training, you know, immediately, if you're putting someone new through those things, they have no expectation on what they used to do, what they could do. And then all of a sudden it's just kind of like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm practicing this. And there's no expectation, hey, I need to be using 40 kilos or I need to be doing 100 reps in one go. And that could be really useful for people, because particularly for people who tend to push themselves, it can hold them back a little bit, which they probably need. And people who are never used to training heavy or scared of weights or scared of things like that, they don't have to worry so much, because it's not something they come to any prejudice. There's no prejudice that follows them, you know?
I agree with that. And the element of like a skill-based modality, there's skill in all things and techniques involved in all of what we've discussed, whether it's Olympic lifting, you know, to the clubs. I just feel like there could be an approach to saying, this midline crossing or this grip work will translate and carry over into my other modalities. When I've been at workshops and, people pick up that, have Olympic lifting background or traditional strength training or kettlebell background, then you put a 2-pound Indian club in their hand to practice and to learn. And that 2 pounds gets exhausting fast. And
the
I've
first
seen
pair of clubs I bought are a kilo and a half each, so 3 pounds.
Yeah.
And I used them a little bit, but I could hardly do anything with them because they were too heavy.
Exactly. It's and that's what's humbling about it, right?
Yeah,
And then,
yep.
like I just got these gorgeous, Body Mind Fit Kehoe replicas the other day, and these are 11 pounds each. And I just loved the challenge, right? They're not easy, but just how like the layering, right? The progressions. And I think all of us that get into club swinging are like, well, the collection breeds, it just grows. All of a sudden you have like a ton
It's hilarious because it's almost like the progression goes the other way with Indian clubs, because you buy some heavier ones and then you end up buying lighter ones, and you don't go the other way. That's the way I did. And then the ones I use the most are like 0.5 kilogram, my teardrop ones.
Well, I'll get contacted by people who have purchased like, like a 5-pound steel club, and then they try to do like inward hearts or outward hearts with 5-pound steel clubs. So I'm like, that's why that didn't work for you, but they're all different, like little families, but you just start off with that baseline or create that trunk of the tree. And then you could branch off, and that exploration is very rewarding.
I think as well, one of the really interesting things about this discussion is that the way that you approach, the way that you seem to approach, movement and physical culture is very different. That many people would see training or training as a kind of something that fits within their life and is a separate part that's sort of compartmentalized into, like, say, 1 hour, 4 times a week. That's when I do training. And they may go to a gym and they'll run a program or whatever. But you're talking about, I suppose, movement and this sort of stuff actually becoming more of a lifestyle that is just part of your life, and it's not easily separated and compartmentalized into just an hour 3 or 4 times a week. And I think the way that all this training, the way that all of these modalities, like you mentioned, a lot of it may have come from like agriculture and from training warriors and training, so it's kind of things that would have been done as part of life, hundreds of years ago, really. So actually to practice it daily, in the morning, in the evening, in the afternoon, it just becomes a part of your lifestyle, and it's not something that's separate. It's something that's very integrated, isn't it?
Yes, because I always say live to move, love to move. Like that is just what I say. I'm like, I live to move and I love to move. And I just find that it is so ingrained in who I am, and I do my best thinking when I'm in motion. So I tend to, like, my movement practice is like a holistic approach, and I have like my more, like I mentioned earlier, my more structured training days, and then I have the days that I'm kind of like intuitively moving, and the days that I focus more on like skill-based modalities. If I get too structured, I lose that innate connection and excitement with my movement practice. Like I that creates stress for me personally. I really enjoy being able to kind of like have it just be a part of who I am. My mom is medically disabled, and she just had her second knee replacement. She's going to have both of her feet surgery on both of her feet, and next year or the year after she'll get her hip replacement. My mom can't even open her palm. My mom's arthritis is so bad, she has it's like a lobster claw hand. And I move because my mom can't. And my grandmother on my father's side, she had crippling arthritis, and I took care of her the year before she passed away and her spine was collapsing. And I saw for many years how arthritis affected my grandmother. And she was from a different generation. She grew up in an orphanage, you know, like she was born in 1914. Exercise was not a part of her life. And I've since, you know, my mom was 20 when she had me. My mom is very young. And I have distinct memories of when I was my son's age. My son is 12. And my mom would come home and she's like, you rub my feet are killing me. My mom had genetically just bad joints, dealt a really shitty hand, and she's lived in chronic pain her whole life. My approach to movement and training is more than the numbers and everything like that, because life is more than just that. And that's why, like we mentioned, there's a time and place for, you know, everything, but we've gotten so far removed from our connections to movement, or we judge others so much. Like with social media, people take one clip and one photo and they create this assumption and dialogue. But at the end of the day, if we're capable and able, that is incredible. And that's why I think of, you know, I'm so inspired by those who have come before me, you know, because I think it's a lifelong commitment to yourself and not the ego. It's beyond that, because at the end of the day, we may, like, we're all on this podcast together. We don't know what we're going to be in 20, 30 years. And we could look back and say, I was capable then. I tapped into my movement potential, and that's important.
Wow, I think that's a fantastic
there you go.
kind of way to start to wrap up. That was really powerful.
I think I was like almost kind of teary eyed over like
I'm ready to do another hour now after that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that was, but I mean that, you know, I mean it's a bit of a cliche and a bit of a, you know, this, you know, people talking about their why and all this sort of thing, but just, you know, just the background there, the kind of the context, I suppose, that you gave, you know, your life and your practice and your passion for, you know, talking about your mother and your grandmother there is fantastic. And I think that will resonate with so many of our listeners. So thank you so much. Kelly, when you what have you got coming up? I mean, obviously, there's a couple of things really. If like I say, if people don't follow you, I really want them to start looking at the sort of stuff that you do, because it's so different, it's so interesting, it's so beautiful and flowing, and you know, it's just different. How can people find out more about you? And you know, if there's anything you've got that you're working on that's coming up, that maybe people can get involved in.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'm at Kettlebells 88 on Instagram. The 8 is for my favorite number, and kettlebells double bells. So I went Kettlebells 88. My email is kelly@kmmoves.com. So kelly@kmmoves.com. I have a website, Kelly Manzone, which, you know, I'm not the most tech savvy human being. It's a beautiful website that I should use more often than I do. And then I have the online courses that I created with my mentor, Paul Bukovinsky, on IndianClubsAcademy.com. We have
I personally recommend that, by the way.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. We filmed that during the pandemic as everything shut down. Paul and I are talking about doing another collaboration soon based on what's happening now that things are opening up. So that's in motion. I have a virtual Fix Your Swing Mace workshop on Saturday, April 30th. For the first time, I was doing virtual workshops myself on my own platform, and this is the first time I'm bringing it to a different platform to try it out, Ensemble. But it's Fix Your Swing. So it's a workshop meant for those who have purchased a mace and maybe they have had some instruction, but not enough instruction. They don't kind of like know quite what to do with it. It's basically taking all the questions that I get on DMs and funneling it into a virtual workshop for beginners and those looking to refine technique. And we just kind of cover regressions and progressions. You know, all these modalities, there's ways to regress or have another option or variation as you're building your foundation. And then I have a workshop on Sunday, April 3rd in Boston. That one's a unique one. It's a basic introduction to kettlebell basic technique, a basic introduction to Indian club and mace. And that's a 6-hour in-person workshop. And then I've got a few others that are in the works for a retreat that my buddy Eduardo is hosting me and my friend John Oden in September. I forget the actual date. It's, I think, the 13th of September. For a movement retreat. So we're going to combine circular training and getting out in nature. We're going to do some stone lifting, some club swinging, all that good stuff. So Eduardo is going to teach some yoga. We're going to go hiking. And we're still organizing that event. And there's a few others that are just in the pipeline that hopefully come to fruition now that we're on the other side of the pandemic. Hopefully.
And I suppose if people follow you on social media and things, they'll get to see the details of all that sort of stuff as it's announced.
Yeah. As that comes, and I do like online consulting and online training, and that's by request. So like I don't necessarily always promote that I do that, but I do.
Yeah, excellent. Pete, do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to say before we close out?
Well, I mean, that end bit, about your mum and grandmum and, just making this like a skill practice, a lifelong pursuit and fitting it into your lifestyle and all of that. I just think that's amazing because that's where somebody could say, like you've got hypermobility and that, genetically, I'm going to end up with arthritis and this and that because of what's happened previously in my family past. You know what I mean? So you could easily use that as an excuse and say, right, I'm going to be in pain. That's it. Or you can do something about it, which you clearly do. And that's like James was saying, it's a big cliche of like, you have to have your why and all of that, but that's like, it's just a huge deal. And it's really good because pretty much everybody can do that. I mean, there's obviously things that you can't deal with this sort of stuff, but it's good for you mentally. It's good for you physically. I'm about to take the dog for a walk as soon as we stop recording this. And I'm going to take, because the weather's so nice, when it's raining and stuff like that, it's different, but when the weather's so nice, I'm going to take my 500 gram teardrops with us as well. And I'm going to do some club swinging in the meadows. So, that sounds a bit...
Take your t-shirt off as well and sort out...
No, I won't do that. But yeah, that sounds a bit like...
You'll be completely naked.
Sounds a bit of happy clappy. I'm going to go club swinging in the meadows. But, it's just really good for you. Like I say, mentally and physically. So, yeah, so thank you, Kelly. That's...
thank you, guys.
That's great.
I think this was one of my favorite conversations. I don't know. That's fun.
Paul, do you have anything you'd like to say before we kind of close up?
No, I mean, I just really enjoyed it. I mean, I think the thing is that we're kind of taught we have to think about fitness in one way. And I think what you've demonstrated is that you can't really separate it, can you? It is kind of you. Moving is you, and you are moving, and without those things, you're not really you. I mean, one of the reasons I think a lot of people struggle with the gym is because they see it as this separate entity.
Yes.
They see, and you've got it in your, the fact is that yes, your living room is surrounded by the things that you love. And for some people that might be paintings. A lot of people love art, so they hang paintings on their wall. And, some people it's books, and they have books everywhere because the books are, part of their life as well. Always a bit suspicious of going into a house that has no books, but, and it's the same with you, you walk around and you'll walk past something, you might have a go with it, Yeah. And it's when we just think being fit is what I do elsewhere is when I think there's going to be a problem, because then you're always never going to be present to it. You've always got to schedule it in. You've always got to think about it as this other. And if it becomes the other, then you're never going to truly see the result you want, because it's never going to become lifestyle.
I loved what you just said. That is awesome. And it's mind space, right? You want to have like a healthy relationship with your training or your movement practice. You want a good relationship with the mind space.
Yeah, without doubt. Brilliant. I've really enjoyed it.
I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and just what basically touching on what Paul and what you just said, Kelly, there was that all through and Steve Cotter talked about the ancient Greeks and things, but he sort of said all through history, people have seen that the mind and the body are connected, you know, and they are together. And it was a couple of 100 years ago. I'm just rereading Man's Search for Meaning at the moment with Viktor Frankl, but a couple of 100 years ago, they kind of separated the mind from the body, you know, and they said, we'll be the experts in the mind and you can be the experts in the body. And they kind of separated it out. You know,
it's like Descartes, isn't it? The brain in the vat, you know?
Yeah. And I think what we've talked about today is, you know, you can't separate it. And this need to kind of separate, you know, the physical from the mental, and they are so linked, and they, you know, they make us who we are. So no, it's been a fantastic conversation, Kelly. It's been really interesting. It's been lovely meeting you in person. And yeah, I'd really recommend, make sure you do. I mean, Pete will probably pop into the show notes, the kind of the website and that sort of thing. He's looking at me.
All right, then I will
go through and do all of that. But certainly do you know, follow Kelly on Instagram, and as a first port of call is probably a great way forward. So thank you all so much for listening. Please do share, like, subscribe. If you're listening on a platform that allows you to leave a review, please do that as well. If you'd like to join us on the Facebook group, just go into groups on Facebook and search Health Oddity, and you'll find us there and click to join. I am at the moment talking to a few people about setting up some more workshops in England. Obviously, we had the fantastic workshop with David Keown the other week. I'm currently talking with Steve Cotter about sorting out him coming over, and Finbar Toulan as well, coming over from Ireland, who's multiple times Kettlebell Sport world champion. So there'll be some great stuff coming up. So thank you so much. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Kelly. And we will see you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Health Odyssey with Peter Lant, Paul Bassett, and James St. Pierre. To get your regular fix of hype-free health, you can subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can find out more on today's and other topics at healthodyssey.com, or find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Health Odyssey.